Hello and welcome to Lead Story. I'm your host, Andrew Laidley, sitting in for your usual host, George Davis, tonight. This evening, we take a deep dive into the outcomes of the 10th Biennial Jamaica Diaspora Conference 2024, which concluded yesterday in Montego Bay, St. James. Of course, the conference is positioned as a celebration of the invaluable connections between Jamaica and our communities overseas, as well as an opportunity to further deepen the relationship to the betterment of Jamaica's growth and development. Now, before I introduce our guests, a short feature on the Diaspora Conference written by Jonathan Atkins and voiced by Courtney Lewis.
It's greetings from across the world. The Montego Bay Convention Center is staging the biennial Jamaican Diaspora Conference. Government, private sector, civil society in Jamaica converged on Rose Hall to discuss Jamaica's diaspora involvement in the country's development. The guest list was headed by none other than Jamaica's Prime Minister, Andrew Holness, and other cabinet members, the leader of the opposition, consular generals, and diaspora chapter heads. So, how important is the Jamaican diaspora? For many, the most immediate contribution that comes to mind, well, its economic significance is very impactful on both a macroeconomic and micro level. Remittances are Jamaica's second largest earner of foreign exchange behind tourism, and the numbers continue to move in an upward trajectory, which means those money transfers back to yard matters in the wider economic outlook for Jamaica. Real estate industry practitioners continue to lament from their experience that Jamaicans in the diaspora are driving the booming real estate market in Jamaica, with many working long hours to send dollars and pounds back home to own a piece of the rock. Jamaica's diaspora population is estimated to be around 3 million, often suggested to be even greater than the domestic population, with the United States dominating the diaspora pool. So, what was discussed at the Diaspora Conference? Investments. Pitches were made to members of the diaspora for ways they can invest, namely real estate, agriculture, and other businesses. Cultural connections. Members of the diaspora explored ways in which they can strengthen their connection to the 876 from wherever they are in the world. Consulate matters. They aired their concerns and suggested improvements as to how Jamaican consulates and embassies can better support their nationals overseas. And lastly, but most controversial, diaspora involvement in governance. This came with some members of the diaspora making bold requests to have seats in Parliament, diaspora voting, and other privileges for Jamaican nationals overseas. Courtney Lewis for Lead Story.
Thank you so much for that, Courtney. Now to introduce our esteemed guests. With me in studio is Dr. Shauna Chin, Vice Chair of the Jamaica Global Diaspora Council, who drove all the way from the conference in Montego Bay to be with us tonight on Lead Story. Doc, welcome. And also joining us on Zoom is David Mullins, Chairman and CEO of Blue Maho Holdings. Welcome, David.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so I want to kickstart the conversation with you, Dr. Chin, right? Let's start with the conference theme, right? It was United for Jamaica's Transformation. I want to find out from you, what did that mean to you ahead of the conference? And now that the conference has ended, what does that mean to you?
Thank you for that question. I think most importantly, one of the things is more than remittances, Jamaicans abroad, we have such large amount of intellectual resource to be able to provide and to collaborate with Jamaica. And that's one of the things we've been trying to say. It's more than remittances, right? We want to make sure that we come back. For example, on the Global Jamaica Diaspora Council, our former Global Jamaica Diaspora Council elected representative for the UK North, he has returned, Dr. Kevin Brown. He is now coming from UK in Rolls-Royce as an engineer, and he's now the president of UTEC. And so these are the things that we want to emphasize that we have coming out of the diaspora, is we come home and we give our intellectual resources as well, and that is where we want to collaborate, which is why United for the Transformation of Jamaica, helping Jamaica get to Jamaica Vision 2030.
Absolutely. Now, Mr. Mullins, coming out of the conference and looking forward, what does that mean to you?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and I'm glad to see Dr. Shauna Chin on here. Shauna is our Vice Chair of the Global Jamaica Diaspora Council, and someone I've known for going on 2 decades, Shauna. And So we're talking about reversing a brain drain and turning it into a brain gain. And this is something we've talked about for 2+ decades. I've been involved in the diaspora movement since 2002, when it was first pulled together thanks to Marlon Hill out of South Florida. And to have this 10th conference is 20 years, 21 officially. We had a gap year. It shows how serious we are. This was not a talk shop, to be honest. And for me, coming out of this conference in particular is that we have some deliverables on our side in the diaspora. And of course, we believe that the government has deliverables on their side. I'm excited to see what comes of that, because I would say we had more people attended than expected, and that's always a good thing, but I think there was also more quality in terms of who attended. It seemed that we had more business people than usual, especially entrepreneurs. It also seemed that we had more first-timers attended than usual, and that for me bodes very well for the future of diaspora engagement.
So we have a lot to look forward to there coming out of the conference. I want to stay with you, Mr. Mullins, because everyone knows what an important role the diaspora plays in terms of remittances, which you spoke about, Dr. Chin. But it cannot, on occasion, cast the relationship as a one-way dependency. Do you believe that thinking is beginning to change?
I am not sure that thinking is beginning to change. I am doing what I can. Unfortunately, the diaspora is approached for remittances. We keep bringing it up, and that's even on our fault. We have some people in the diaspora who say they want to vote because we send back so many remittances. And I have to say to them, the remittances are not sent to the government coffers. Right. They're sent to friends and family. And regardless of who is in power or in Jamaica, you're sending remittances anyway. So I think we should stop bringing that up on the diaspora side. And we are approached all the time for donations to the point we're almost overwhelmed. We're being begged constantly. So people see us as big wallets that they can go and try and take money from. And I think that has to change. You need to look at us as investors who want to deploy capital in Jamaica and get a return on our investment. With Blue Moho Capital, that's what I've been doing for 6 years, is investing in diaspora capital. Most of my investors are Jamaican descent, living here in the United States, and we're investing in Jamaica and the wider Caribbean in different ways. And now we're going to do it at scale, and I do think we will play our part in changing the way people think about the diaspora, but the diaspora has to put their money where their mouth is.
Yeah, Mr. Mullins, so you touched on something a while ago in terms of your investment background, and there was a big announcement coming out of the conference, which we'll touch on a little later, not quite yet, all right, but we're getting there. Dr. Chin, I want to come back to you, right, because one of the most controversial calls from some of the members of the diaspora is for political representation locally. So where do you lean on that particular issue?
Well, that's a really good question. It's a difficult question to answer, because one of the things is, in Jamaica, Jamaicans on the ground know exactly what challenges are being faced. And so it's very difficult for persons overseas to be able to have, whether it is tribal relationships or whether it is, we have things that we want to see. We have our own goals, right? But telling that or influencing that in Jamaica sometimes can be a very difficult thing, because we're not living here. We're not receiving the outcome of whatever decision we make.
The day-to-day.
The day-to-day. And so I understand that call from the Jamaican side, but I do understand that that is the call from the diaspora. One of the things is, sitting on the Global Jamaica Diaspora Council, I had the opportunity to see how Jamaica is trying to bridge that gap, how the government is trying to bridge that gap. And one of the things is, at the Global Diaspora Summit in Ireland 2 years ago, myself and the former chair, we traveled to Ireland so that we can hear from other countries how they are trying to bridge that gap, how they are trying to influence or implement diaspora voting. It's not easy. It's not an easy thing, but I do understand from both sides. And while I have my own personal views that I believe it is a task that Jamaicans at home should be primarily involved in what happens as far as for representation. As vice chair, I make sure that that is a call that we discuss in detail, so that we're able to come up with good benchmark practices, evidence-based practices, so that we can get to the right solution.
Yeah, Dr. Ching, I want to pose a similar question to you, Mr. Mullins. Do you do you think members of the diaspora should be permitted to vote in a referendum, say, on Jamaica becoming a republic or Jamaica's final court of appeal?
Well, I find that question weird, to be honest. I served on the Jamaica Diaspora Advisory Board as the first future leaders representative for the USA. This is 2008. So this is what preceded the Global Jamaica Diaspora Council. And we had a joint select committee on diaspora affairs in Parliament, and I got to present. And one of the things that I pointed out is, number one, we can already vote. So people in the diaspora can fly down into Jamaica, register to vote at an address locally. As long as they get their voter's ID, there's a way to get your voter's ID. You get that voter ID, you can fly down and vote anytime. There are people right now in the diaspora who go home and vote. So we can already vote. So yeah, but I don't think you should ask if we can vote, if we should vote in a referendum. We can vote if we want to. So now the question should be, should we be allowed to vote necessarily for anything though, right? It doesn't give us additional way to vote because we can vote.
Right.
So should we be allowed to vote absentee ballots? Some people want that. They live abroad now, they've moved, they live abroad, they want to be able to vote in a referendum, they want to vote in a local election because it covers the constituency where they still maintain a residence. It's not their primary residence, but they want a say. And there are other people who don't live down there at all, have no piece of property, and they want to vote. So we fall into different categories. So who should be allowed to vote, I think, is what we should be asking, not saying the diaspora, because we're not homogeneous.
Yeah, I see Dr. Ching jumping to come in. I'm going to give you an opportunity to comment on that. I have a few things I want to say as well.
Well, I was nodding and agreeing with your point that, you know, one of the things is, what I'm hearing anyway on the ground in the diaspora is that it's, they want to be able to have the ease of being able to vote overseas at the embassies and the consulates.
Right.
So as a United States citizen, I'm able to participate in a general election at the U.S. Embassy here in Jamaica. So when I am on vacation here, there's an election taking place, I'm also able to participate. And I think that's what the diaspora is saying.
That is what I was going to clarify with Mr. Mullins, because I think that's what they're really seeking, right? It's to that kind of ease and convenience of participating in the political representation that way.
Correct, because flying down...
Well, I was going to say, I think it's important that we ask that question then. I think that the media in Jamaica has, unfortunately, for 2 decades, refused to ask the right question. So I'm making you ask the right question tonight.
So right here on the lead story, that is the question, Mr. Mullins.
Right. So here's what I've said every time, and I get in trouble in the diaspora for this every time, and I don't care. I'm going to say it on here. I'm going to say this. I agree with Shauna. What I said in the Joint Select Committee was 2 things. Number one, the Boston Tea Party existed. It happened in the United States because I said no taxation without representation. These Americans got fed up of paying taxes to the King of England and then threw the tea overboard. That's what started that issue. So what I would say to people is that no representation without taxation. You cannot seek to be represented in Parliament if you're not willing to pay taxes. We need to be careful. It shouldn't be a poll tax. Jamaica cannot afford overseas voting. So if you're already living abroad, pay a postage stamp and mail it. I think it should be facilitated at the consulates and at the embassy where I can drop off my ballot. Go online, print to drop it off. That's different from saying put somebody
One second, Mr. Mullins. I'm going to ask you to stick a pin right there. You're watching Lead Story right here on CVM TV. We take a quick break. We'll be right back. Story right here on CVM TV. We're talking about the Diaspora Conference, which concluded yesterday in Montego Bay. And before we went to the break, Mr. Mullins, you were in the middle of making a point. I'm going to ask you to just pick up back on that point.
No, well, you did say stick a pin, and I stuck the pin, so thank you for...
You can remove the pin now.
We remove the pin. So when I presented on the Joint Select Committee of Diaspora Affairs to Parliament, I mentioned 2 things. Number one, I do think that it should be no representation without taxation. I think the reverse has to be true. So the diaspora's remittances are not taxes. They're not money paid to the government of Jamaica. So I think that if somebody is willing to pay a voluntary tax, then you could facilitate voting for them. However, that opens a can of worms. What are they voting for? As the way our constitution is set up right now, the Senate is appointed, so we can't just vote for somebody to be in the Senate to represent the diaspora. And then the House is based on members of parliament who have a constituency. There is no constituency outside of Jamaica. So we'd have to have constitutional changes, which means local Jamaicans would need to be involved in that. So that's the first problem, and that's where that is. Just doing an overseas ballot, I think, is simple. That's different. Pay a postage, drop it off at the consulate or the embassy. That should be facilitated. I think that's fine. The second thing I did say while I was there at the Diaspora Affairs, this Parliament Joint Select Committee, was also about the issue of who can actually sit in Parliament, because our Constitution, and I said it in there, I was like, I have people on my board here with me. There's 4 of us from the US, 3 main ones, 1 future leader, 2 from Canada and a future leader, 2 from the UK and a future leader. My Canadian and UK brethren and sisters on the same board with me, who live further away from me, were able to go and sit in Parliament. In fact, they did not have to be a Jamaican citizen to run for office in Jamaica. And in fact, one of them did that. She moved back to Jamaica as a Canadian citizen and ran in Jamaica for the political parties. And I said, that's not fair. I think we need to have fairness. So either all of us should be able to run or none of us should be able to run. I am fine either way, but it needs to be fair. And of course, that is an issue we have in Jamaica now, a topic that is of interest.
So let me pick your brain a little bit, Dr. Chin, because with all the nuances that Mr. Mullins just spoke about, would a diaspora lobby group be just as effective in maintaining focus on the interests of Jamaicans overseas then?
That's a great question. Well, I think we have to have that conversation. And at the Embassy of Jamaica in Washington, D.C., our head of mission there is Ambassador Audrey Marks. And one of the things she discussed in our last meeting, she has every month she has a Let's Connect meeting. So I encourage all diasporans to get involved on the websites and the databases of the head of missions wherever you live, because they're trying to engage us, right, and have these exact conversations. One of the conversations that Ambassador Marks mentioned was about facilitating a lobby group. But of course, as the head of mission, you can't organize in a whole person's country.
Yeah.
So one of the things that she's been telling the organizations is finding a way to teaching organizations in Jamaican organizations abroad about lobbying, what lobbyists are, how to organize, etc. And so that was an excellent meeting. And so persons within the diaspora can get engaged if they follow these protocols, right? And get on the pages where the information is being held. And so Embassy of Jamaica, Washington, D.C., Audrey Marks, Ambassador Audrey Marks, she had that conversation. And so I think it's impressive that you had that question.
Right. So, well, one of the things that, we've been skirting around is the elephant in the room, the matter of crime, right? And the deterrent that has been from getting more persons to come home. We know Vision 2030, all of us, we recite it all the time. Jamaica, the place to live, work, raise families, and do business. So let me pose this question to you, Mr. Mullins. What do you think needs to happen before we see more Jamaicans coming back home, returning to Jamaica to live, work, raise families, and do business?
So I'm going to answer your previous question and then answer this one as bluntly as I can tonight. And so firstly, we already have lobby groups in the diaspora, and we are not homogeneous. That is why we don't have a single lobbying entity, whether it's Jamaica, focus on Jamaica, the US, Canada, UK. There's no single entity because none of us agree on everything. So we will never have a single lobbying group. We'll have multiple. Some will do things that we don't agree with. And that's just the nature of freedom of speech. Now, in terms of what do we need to do to get more people in terms of Jamaica, what does Jamaica, you see me say we, me in Jersey, we. What do we need to do to get more people in the diaspora to move back home when it comes to crime? We actually need to see political will to fight crime and corruption, and we need to see some politicians go to jail. The 9-day wonders in Jamaica, I've been born in 1981. I cannot name a single politician in Jamaica who has been caught with their hand in the cookie jar, who has actually been prosecuted and spent time in jail. So Jamaica is not serious about crime and corruption. We're trying to bring down the gang-related violence, but all of us know people who should not be in politics, should not be anywhere near any government contract. And it does not matter which party is in power, and we know this, but we pretend and we want to be so nice. And honestly, I tired of it. And I know a whole heap of people tired of it. Look at this, why?
Dr. Chain, I'm going to give you a chance to address that question as well.
Yes, thank you. So at the Diaspora conference, we did have the Deputy Commissioner, Police Commissioner, we had the Police Commissioner present, and one of the things that he said that was so important goes into what David Mullings just said, which is the enforcement of rules here in Jamaica, and that's what he and his administration is working on. So I was pleased to hear that coming out of the Police Commission. I also was able to sit in a panel. We have on the Global Jamaica Diaspora Council, we're aligned with focal points within each ministry. And so our citizen security member is aligned within the Ministry of National Security, Mr. Kevin Jr., retired Captain Kevin Jr. out of Canada. And what he and the Ministry of Security did was they presented a panel, it was a 90-minute panel to the diasporans who were present, and they were able to present to us what the plan was for enforcement of laws that are currently on the book, as well as for the transformation that they want for crime. And so
that's interesting. You heard the plan. They presented
absolutely.
a
They
crime plan.
presented the crime plan
Interesting.
at the Diaspora conference, which is why if you missed it, you have to watch it. Because there were key panels such as the crime prevention and others that were broadcast on live stream via the GIS. And so you know, persons within the diaspora who are interested to learn about crime and the crime plan are able to rewatch that. And so I was very pleased to sit and hear in the audience, because coming from the diaspora, we hear everything that you hear. And we mostly hear the bad parts. So hearing what was being done was important, as well as hearing the vision in moving forward. I was pleased to hear that at the conference.
Interesting. I'm going to have to tune into that particular segment of the conference. I'll take your advice on that. Now, we're almost out of time here on the show, but I do want to go back to Mr. Mullins, because Mr. Mullins, you made a big announcement about a diaspora bond during your presentation at the conference, right? I'm going to give you the opportunity now to tell us a little bit more about that initiative.
Well, I appreciate it. I made a few announcements that I was hoping would be the biggest one, though, is that Diaspora bond. We're doing a bond that this is a debt vehicle that is targeted to Jamaicans in the US, Canada, and UK that we expect to have live by August of this year. A 5-year bond paid 8% per year and paid out semi-annually. The idea being that since I was on this Diaspora Advisory Board, we've been talking about doing a bond. When I was on the board, we couldn't do it. Jamaica was in the middle of essentially a balance of payments crisis. We had to go to the IMF. So we were looking to reduce our debt to GDP ratio. So think about 2012, we were somewhere in the 147% debt to GDP. Today, Jamaica is down to 72%. In 12 years, we've cut it in half. We are now the perfect case study about how to go about doing that, right? Greece is not the case study. Jamaica is a case study. And we're heading down to 60. So the government actually doesn't need money from a bond standpoint. They're not issuing new debt, right? They're refinancing debt. And in fact, they don't want to take on more debt. They want to focus on reducing it. So the government itself is not necessarily looking to do a bond, even if it was a diaspora bond. I think that the private sector has always had a role to play. I worked at Jamaica National Building Society 3 times. I helped to design our high-yield savings account. So we had a product targeted to people in the US, Canada, and UK. That was a high-yield savings account. That money came and then sat in the bank account. We could unlend it for mortgages at Jane, thankfully. We are essentially doing the same thing, but it's not a savings account. It's an unsecured bond that's going to be supporting microfinance in Jamaica. So we own 19.5% of Sprint Financial Services Limited, which is getting their BOJ license. We can unlend to Jamaican businesses and help to bring down the cost of capital. We are now going to be working with Seed, which is Michael Leach Jr.'s microfinance company, for personal loans. We can do the same thing. And then we work with MAPEX on the agricultural side. So you as a farmer want to be able to come and pay 20-30% down and buy a tractor to then mechanize your farm and get more from a yield standpoint. They can't get a loan from the bank. So we have lent money to MAPEX in the past, and we want to scale that up. So we see some really good opportunities, but we're going to be doing affordable housing, We announced another 1,400 houses in Portmore and St. Thomas that we'll be financing, in addition to the 700 we're doing in Old Harbour. And these are less than 40 million and 20 million Jamaican in price point. Affordable houses for local Jamaicans. That is what a diaspora bond can support.
Yeah. Okay, Mr. Mullins. Well, I don't know about you, Dr. Chin, but you know, will you be participating in this bond?
Well, what I think is that we had such a great conversation and presentation, such as Blue Maho with David Mullins, that we were able to see what is available. And I think that is what the conference was about, united for transformation, coming together, collaborating on ideas, what is available to us, and moving forward together. I think that's the most important thing. And I think based on what he was saying as well, on the financial capacity of Jamaica and where we are presently, loving to hear those statistics. You know, even just within our sustainable development goals you talked about earlier.
Right.
At the conference, we were able to hear that Jamaica is aligned with the United Nations SDGs at 91.3%. That's an amazing amount, right? An achievement at 69.5% of Vision 2030. So those are statistics that I loved to hear coming out of the conference that I'm able to take back to the diaspora to say, no man, Jamaica going with a bag of things.
All right, so we're up on the end of the show now, but I have a final question I want to pose to both of you, and you might have just like 30 seconds to answer the question in total, both of you.
David.
But as cultural ambassadors overseas, right, the diaspora plays a crucial role in introducing Brand Jamaica and Jamaican brands to individuals and markets that may never have been exposed. So how can we leverage our reputation and the diaspora's relationship in their adopted countries, right, to further enhance any untapped potential? Let's start with you, Dr. Chin.
I think that's an excellent question because it is the basis. It's an excellent question because it's the basis of why the Global Jamaica Diaspora Council was created. We have representatives from the major traditional regions, but now we've expanded into the non-traditional regions, Africa, Europe, Latin America, name it, and there's a representative who sits there on the council, and they're able to tap in and say within their region what is available and how we can move forward together.
Yeah. Mr. Mullins?
I love that he said that because, you see, I went and take off the jacket. We're talking about Brand Jamaica. I have to show you. These are the things that matter to me, right? I lived in Germany for 4 months in Berlin. All I had to do was wear a Jamaica jersey or a T-shirt, and they would say Bob Marley, Usain Bolt, and weed. Those were the 3 things. We can do more than that, but you know, this is a brand called Boxer Socks, Iris Steppins. This is a Jamaican who I mentor. I'm the chairman of the Young Entrepreneur Association of Jamaica. She asked me, should I come to the Diaspora Conference and get a booth? I said, come, get a booth. She came, the Prime Minister visited her booth and bought 13 pairs of socks. We need to invest in Jamaicans like this. You need to allow the diaspora a chance to invest in them. But most importantly, our culture is our biggest export. That's what Steve Wilson, Sean Paul's manager, said. We need to invest in our culture, which means we need to own intellectual property, and we need to be willing to sign contracts and do things properly. We make reggaeton, blow up, gone past reggae and dancehall. We make Afrobeats, blow up, gone past reggae and dancehall. Do the thing like say they are foreign. Okay, and let us invest in you guys.
Okay, Mr. Mullins. Well, we need to invest in Jamaica. We'll have to continue this conversation another time, right? Big things are happening locally in Jamaica, and big things are happening in the diaspora as well. Absolutely. I have to say a big thank you to our guest here on Lead Story. Today, Dr. Shauna Chin, Vice Chair of Jamaica's Global Diaspora Council, as well as David Mullins, Chairman and CEO of Blue Maho Holdings. That's it for our show today, everyone. My name is Andrew Laidley. On behalf of the entire production team,